Okay. Okay. So Elizabeth, I'm really excited to be talking with you this morning. You actually are one of the people I've respected for a long time in the EMDR world, and I've gotten like the honor of learning from you. Yeah. Do you want to just introduce yourself, who you are, as a person and as a
Mhm.
professional, and then we'll dive into some of EMDR, trauma, and art.
Well, I guess as a professional, I'm a director for Trauma Institute, Child Trauma Institute, and I'm an EMDR trainer, consultant. Um, I integrate a lot of modalities creatively into EMDR to work with complex clients. I run their attachment and dissociation training and art therapy and EMDR training. Recently edited a book with my colleagues Jen Marchand, Sherry Jacobs, and Jocelyn Fitzgerald. So, very proud of this now that it's finally out.
Wait, show us
And
the book. Show us the book again. I just want to.
okay,
And where
yeah,
can we get it? Where can
yeah.
we get it? On Amazon or where do we get it?
Amazon, yeah, it's Routledge is the
Okay.
publisher, and it's on Amazon. And Tour de Force, boy, was a journey right through COVID and beyond. And so very happy. We have 13 authors in there with all kinds of creative ideas. And so what my focus is, I guess, professionally at this point, as a creative arts therapist, as a EMDR clinician, I do IFS, I feel like that's really an important part of the way I work, not necessarily traditionally strict IFS, but working with parts in creative ways, is explore how to work creatively with folks with complex PTSD primarily,
Mhm.
and help them in a way that's kinder, gentler, and more um, that takes in their experience more compassionately than often the clinical field does, so that they can get their work done and hopefully process through it with something like EMDR, which can be really effective when someone's ready. So that's been the focus of my research and work for, I don't know, the last 5 years, I think.
Yeah. So like as you say that, I find it to be like such soothing balm to my professional sense of self that's like, what's the answer? How do I treat this client who has complex trauma? Do I just dive in and do EMDR? Like I did my consultant in training, right? My consultancy training with you. And the thing that
Mhm.
almost gave me like a sigh of relief of was like when we spoke about and you gave us consultation on, listen, when it comes to complexity or specific presentation, we have to work creatively or we have to work a little loosely and also intentionally. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, I know you're an EMDR trainer and you're a clinical director and you wrote a book, and you've been in the field for a long time. I don't know how long have you, when did you, how long have you been in the field of mental health for?
I think since 96,
Yeah. Okay.
however long that is, I don't know, something like
So,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm wondering if you can just share, like, what does that mean, complex presentation? If there's someone out there who just took a EMDR training, I know myself, when I took an EMDR training, I sat in the training feeling really confused. Like, on the one hand, I felt like, wow, this is amazing. On the other hand, when I started implementing some of the skills, or any kind of skill, but specific EMDR with clients who had a lot of neglect or a lot of ongoing trauma, it was very confusing because I was hitting against, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, parts work. So do you want to just talk a little bit about like what it means complexity, and for someone who's just becoming a trauma therapist or is noticing that they're hitting roadblocks, what that might look like, or yeah, share with us.
Or there, complexity can look a lot of different ways, as it kind of complexity is implies. There's a lot. It's not a simple looking situation. So when we think of complex PTSD, we usually think of symptoms across lots of domains. we think of symptoms that are around relationship, and CPTSD is more focused in a way on relational trauma, and relational trauma being a part of what creates a complex traumatization. Parents or caregivers and child trauma, early stressors, and impacting attachment, and impacting ability to form secure relationships. So that's kind of at the core of what most people think about complex PTSD, but it affects a lot of domains. People have more physical or somatic symptoms. They may have more behavioral presentations. They might have a harder time going inward and reflecting. Their triggers might be much bigger. They may have developmental issues related to having experienced trauma early in life and being basically on survival mode and not able to just engage the world openly and develop in the same way. So their survival strategies, or their survival parts, if you will, defenses, dominate their life more than allow them to just be free and open and trust in relationships, or relax into life, so to speak, and enjoy it. There's so many alarm bells that might go off in their head uh, for lots of reasons related to childhood chronic stress. So you look across domains. Most of my clients with complex traumatization, they deal with body issues. They deal with maybe illness that's happened as a result of chronic trauma. They might have identity issues. They might feel trapped in their own parts, if you will, or unable to kind of break through and see the light at the end of the tunnel. Somebody who has maybe a less severe, less complex, I mean, all trauma is kind of complex,
Yeah.
form of trauma, may have experienced relative stability in their life until this traumatic experience happened, and then they become symptomatic. But they remember back when they were able to live life normally, regulate, etc. And that's a much more straightforward situation for an EMDR trained clinician to jump in there and start doing the trauma reprocessing work. Someone with complex trauma may not remember ever having that experience of feeling regulated and not being on survival mode, or having threat responses
Yeah.
every day or often.
So you're saying almost like the difference in the presentation is that someone with maybe who has a trauma or has something that or has symptoms, right? Let's just like if somebody comes in and
Mhm.
reaches out for therapy or for counseling or something's not right, they're having symptoms, and someone who maybe has a recent trauma or a difficulty, they have like a body memory or they have some kind of template for safety or security. And you're
Mhm.
saying that in
Yeah.
terms of right. And you're saying that in terms of the treatment, it could be a bit more straightforward, which I want to ask you about in a minute, but straightforward in terms of like they're not kind of having to jump through loopholes internally, or they're not getting stuck in different parts of themselves, which might be a little, there's less inner like fragmentation. And so you could kind of engage
Mhm.
in the processing, maybe with what generic psychotherapy or specifically EMDR is like, oh, here, let's come up with like a safe place or safe people or love. And then you process this thing that's connected to the symptoms because there's something that's right dysfunctionally
Right.
stored information emotionally, right? Or somatically or whatever it is, or a negative belief. You're saying someone with complex trauma, often it's the relational world, right? Where they don't have security. So what we're going to find is that if somebody wants healing, you're saying we're going to notice a lot more of like complexity where they might not ever remember feeling secure and safe. So I'm wondering like how,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, go on.
and the relationship with someone with complex trauma becomes much more important in therapy. Being able to work with the therapeutic relationship, which is also challenged a lot by that person's experiences in life where other people weren't safe or they were the source of their trauma. And so the relationship then needs to be a really thoughtful part of how we conduct our therapy with someone with complex PTSD. And that might take them a long time to feel trust or to be able to open up, to express their feelings around shame. Shame becomes a really one of the hallmarks of complex PTSD is feeling a lot of shame and self-identity issues, unworthiness, and in different kinds of ways. So it's a longer process because they can't just link up with you and do the work instantly. That their systems are telling them you may not be a safe person in lots of different ways, and being able to work through the parts of themselves that have been wounded around attachment is a part of the work.
You're basically saying that, tell me if I'm understanding you. So basically, sometimes we think, oh, we have this client who's coming in maybe with anxiety, with moodiness, with irritability, finding less than ideal ways to self soothe, oftentimes health issues, struggles relationally. And essentially, it makes me think about this comment that one of my consultants shared. She's my sensory motor trainer, and she said something. She's like, trauma, and take this with a grain of salt, but she's like, trauma is easy to heal. The personality impact of what trauma does to us takes a lot more
Mhm.
time, right? The security, the trust, the openness, the
Yeah.
relational piece. So it's not this, like what you're saying is like the specific of if we're working on a target or we're helping process a memory, that landing place might be simple, but all the pieces around
Hmm.
it are getting there, helping all the parts settle down or be receptive to healing. um, could be more challenging. So what I'm hearing you say is essentially we can't look at trauma healing or if we want to be efficient as separate from the relationship. It's kind of like we need to be able to really scaffold a secure relational
Right.
dynamic of the clients coming in with all these parts, or like, are you going to hurt me again, or are you going to take advantage, or do I have to people please, or are you going to be trusting and nice, but then, oh my goodness, do you still like me, or right, are you going to judge the shame, or I feel so ashamed, are you going to, so all of that tracking, right, and the parts inside, so they're not just,
Yeah.
so we would be doing a disservice by saying, okay, step aside, let's just jump right in, we're going to do healing and then bye. It's like a lot slower
Yeah. It
process.
doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It doesn't generally work. I mean, it when you have a lot of chronic stresses in childhood, your brain is going to wire up to protect you, and you're going to create action patterns, states, parts, whatever you want. There's lots of ways to describe them that are going to be locked into patterns around protecting yourself interpersonally and managing the overwhelm and stress. So when someone comes to you with a slew of symptoms from complex PTSD, which they may have been becoming worse over time as they have these re-experiencing of traumatic relationships, then working with those defenses parts states, working with them, and I say it in a kind of trying to bridge through understanding those parts, it becomes a critical part of the work. And I can say that that is trauma work. It's not just the reprocessing part, but the trauma work is also working with the parts of someone that are there for self-protection to orient, update, um, receive a corrective response, open up to perspective taking, reflection, and ultimately become curious and open and empowered in some way.
Mm.
So that takes some time, and it takes some, I think, attunement skills um, to and it is different for each client that comes to us.
So are you saying that, let's say a client comes in and says they're having panic attacks, or
Mhm,
they are unable to be sexually intimate because they have these fearful thoughts, right? So they're kind of having
mhm.
flashbacks or body memories. So if a therapist might, if the client, because this is what I'm thinking about. Let's say a client comes in with panic, help me heal. And sometimes I say to clients, let me
Mhm.
guess, you want healing yesterday. Because kind of what you said, right? Like usually these symptoms are kind of like building for a while. And by the time they reach out, they're in so much distress and they're in so much pain. So sometimes
Yeah.
there's this like rushed energy and this like pressure coming from the client that's like, heal me, heal me, heal me. So, what would you say to a
Yeah.
therapist who's sitting across of that client who's basically saying, can we dive in? Can we dive in? Can we dive in? Can we dive in? Because I know you just said, well, actually, that attunement is trauma work, right? It's not like, wait, 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 preparation, then trauma work. So, what would you say to a therapist who's
Mhm.
feeling that, rushed energy from the client to dive in already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say appreciate it first and foremost. It makes sense.
Yeah.
They're suffering, they're having symptoms, and it feels overwhelming. Um, I specialize in intensive therapy, so I have clients that come pretty desperate for help to do intensive therapy, which is all day for multi days. And they're usually very motivated to dive in to the worst parts. In some ways, maybe parts of them aren't, of course, but their symptoms are really pushing them to try to get relief. And I think we need to validate that more than anything
Mm,
initially, and then hold that attunement. It doesn't mean that we dive into
mm,
the trauma reprocessing part, but we start to explore and validate what that's like for them. And I really go back to thinking about mentalizing our clients, really understanding what it's like to stand in their shoes so that they can feel that scene. And then a conversation about what's wise and good can unfold a- as a, as a collaborative effort.
mm,
It's, I mean, the wise thing usually is to really work on the building resources and building readiness and coming up with strategies that aren't going to exacerbate the situation. And before you can really get to that point to have that conversation, the person in front of you needs to know you understand them. And
mm,
so I would say, take some time to really understand and to help your client feel understood and seen. And then come at it from what you know
mm.
is a wise direction, and have a conversation in a collaborative way with your client about what next steps should be.
I love that. And I guess in my mind, I think about what you just said about parts work a couple of minutes ago, where essentially what I'm hearing you say is like this like radical validation or this like first, if somebody's
Mhm.
coming in with a rushed energy, instead of like being like, settle down, you child, right? It's almost like or noticing that it brings this pressure to you, right? Because sometimes our clients come in with this like right pressure. Um, what I'm hearing
Yeah.
you say is basically just align with them and say, "Of course you're feeling this way, right? You have this like so
Oh,
much
yeah.
going on, and I want to understand more about where this is coming from because wow, right? So there's almost like this alignment and then what I'm also hearing you say is instead of jumping in from this urgency of like, okay, let's just dive into the worst trauma memories, because essentially what we might be doing is circumventing some parts, right? There's might be parts of the system that are
Mhm.
terrified or not ready, or don't trust you or me, right, as a therapist yet to do that work. It's like instead of listening only from the urgent parts, um, we're saying we're valid. Help me understand. So it's like we're validating the urgency and then we make a mindful choice of let's just see what we need in order to then do that work because if we go in prematurely sometimes there's backlash, right? Is or
Yeah. We can activate too much, or
yeah.
the system will double down for protection. And you want to work collaboratively. I'm really in favor of a collaborative stance with a client from the get-go, so that you don't create a hierarchical situation that stands a good chance of reenacting trauma for them. And it's not it's not easy because our clients come with, often a lot of childhood trauma stuff, and to come to somebody who's a therapist immediately creates a dynamic of inequality. But for us to be sensitive to that, and try to hold a more collaborative stance where we're treating our clients their age and we're orienting towards them as the expert of who they are, which they are, and not just prescribing, this is what you need to do, and here I'm the expert. Um,
Mhm.
so that collaborative stance, I think, is really important for you both to arrive at a plan that feels like that there's agreement on, by all the parts, hopefully. But that that can't happen if you come in with just your cookie cutter idea of what you need to do. You really have to work with an openness to what's next with your client being a full participant.
Mm. I love what you're saying because what I think about is really humility and how, it's like it's
Yeah.
not about I'm the expert and you're the client, it's like we're all humans. And I always say I'm like we're always taking and giving. Like I remember there was someone who mentored an uncle of mine, and he really helped him through a hard time. And then I ended up being in some kind of supportive relationship with the child of that person who mentored my uncle. And I remember just thinking like we're all givers and we're all takers. Like it's just humanity. And what I'm hearing and what you're saying is like almost this openness of what do you think about this idea? Like from my experience or my knowledge or as I'm getting to know you, this is what I'm thinking. How does that sound? So I'm just hearing such a gentle approach. And from to me, Liz, what I hear is actually confidence and skill because
Mhm.
when you're confident and skillful and humble, then it's like, well, you're the expert, right? It's not like I need to be the expert. It's like that very humble but confident approach.
Yeah, I think that's our own need to work on that bias piece often too. That's kind of instilled in our culture of therapy and counseling and psychotherapy for that matter. But if we can step our own ego needs back, we can make more room for the work. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it.
Yeah.
And it also invites the client to feel like they can show up like in a psychologically safe way. They can open up about what's feels shameful. You make room for those emotions that are most hidden when you're able to step back and be gentle and be collaborative and not have to be the expert. And well, you have to also know that you're the one that has studied it and they're coming to for advice, but you don't have to hold that in some kind of hierarchical way.
I always say I'm like clients with complex trauma or just people, but especially people who've
Yeah.
gone through complex trauma. I'm like, there are canine dogs and they can sniff ego, they can sniff safety, and they can sniff if you have capacity or interest. And I love what you're just saying. It's kind of like here, like they can sense, like, can I bring my most shameful or confused or frightened parts of me eventually to the therapy room? Because their parts are always tracking, right? Like, are you someone
Yeah.
that I can share with? I remember once someone who I really respected said something like an off color joke about someone else or like just something that was a little demeaning. And in that moment, I'm like, I won't trust you. I don't care how much you care. Like, you've been very sweet to me, but
Right.
the fact that you can say something about that other person, So these little implicit dynamics or the way that we interact or we take responsibility, for however we show up and what we say, I think it's really important. So, Liz, can you tell us a little bit about creative arts and EMDR? Like, tell us a little bit
Oh
about
yeah.
the ways, yeah, that you work with complex clients in a creative way. Because we know a lot of times complexity kind of gets stuck and people don't have thoughts all organized. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's such an underutilized, and I think, of course, there's plenty of folks in the field that are changing that, but it's an underutilized asset, if you will, and also approach. When we think about someone who's stuck in blended with parts of themselves that are reliving trauma or experiencing threat responses, their window of tolerance for the world constricts. It's very hard to engage risk taking, or even sometimes even going outside their home and to the grocery store or anywhere. They can feel very self-conscious, worried, fearful, and that point of view can get really stuck in place. Creativity kind of opens up lots of different possibilities. It goes in the reverse direction. I can get it out. I can find a place to contain it that's outside my head. I can reflect on it outside of me. So I love the way in which creative arts therapy increases the ability to reflect from different angles, to get something out and to look at it and to maybe make it a concretized kind of metaphor in a way that can be looked at from afar. Getting distance from it seems to be one way in which it can be managed, or even begin to start the digestion process. Um, and that kind of constriction that so many people experience, and we all do when we're really stuck in our trauma parts or traumatized triggers, is it's not reflective. And if we can start to express it outward, we can start to see it from other people's point of view too. You're working creatively with someone, they open up curiosity, which sometimes gets really shut down
Mm.
when people are fearful or stuck in fight flight states. Curiosity kind of runs the other direction. They can start to feel a little bit of empowerment over what it is they're experiencing when they can do something about it. It kind of channels that cortisol into something that is, they can be proud of, or they can see as an expression of themselves. I think explore identity. There's so many ways in which creative
Yeah.
approaches can get it out and make it into a form, and then become a part of that digestion.
I love
What's
the word
re
that you say. Yeah, I love the way that you're
mhm,
saying digestion because I love simplifying
mhm,
concepts. So basically, what we're saying is that if there's like um, an emotional experience or a trauma or some kind of memory that's stuck right in the body, it hasn't been digested. It's
yeah,
kind of like, how, like I always say, I'm like, it's taking up a lot of real estate, right? So you're basically
mhm,
saying part of trauma processing or any kind of right processing of an emotional memory or an experience is that it hasn't begun digesting, right? It's kind of still here. It's like stuck and we want to help it digest. And then as it digests, the symptoms soften, or for some people, they
mhm,
actually go away, right? Whatever the symptoms might be. So what I'm hearing you say is like, right, when we have symptoms or when people have gone through trauma or are having some symptoms, what you're saying is like their window gets very small, so they might almost be frozen with that, right? They have symptoms as if they're, let's say, a 10-year-old who was physically hit or somebody who was abused or chronically neglected, even though they might be a 43-year-old, and they get in the car or they go to the grocery and stimulation or any kind of sensory input just triggers them, or they're kind of stuck with that 10-year-old, right, nervous system or that
yeah,
experience. What I'm hearing you say is that with art, I just know for my own self, I'm not an art therapist. I'm a social worker. I ended up hiring two art therapists and a dance movement therapist. We spoke about this, and we actually just partnered with NYU's art therapy program
oh,
for an
wonderful.
intern. Yeah, for an intern. And I know that there's not enough knowledge and awareness about how art therapy is such a powerful trauma informed therapeutic method. And people are like, Esther, like you think, you validate art therapy. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like art is because for my own self, art has been such a resource for healing. That's why I'm asking you, because what I'm hearing you say is, and this is what I guess I'm visualizing as you're talking about like the distancing and the reflecting piece. What I'm hearing you say is kind of like they can gain some perspective, or there's all this pent up energy and it's almost like putting it somewhere. Because I just know for my own self, somebody once asking me, even a friend, like, well, what are you thinking? And I'm like, I'm not thinking anything, I'm just feeling way too much. And what was really powerful for me and still is like, I'll take a collage and I'll just like cut out pictures of very intense emotions or pictures or feelings, right? Or words. And like that is so, and I look at it and I'm like, wow, so it's not me, but that's a part of me, or I feel that way sometimes. And that's been, and I also just write a lot of poetry. So I'm wondering for you, like with clients, do you ever find that clients, or for people listening, if a client isn't answering all of your questions, I wonder, is that where you go in, or how do you offer creative arts? I know people have to obviously have the right skills and tools, but how do you then
Mhm.
suggest that to someone who maybe is stuck and is not able to answer the cognitive questions? Yeah.
Yeah, it can be, it's of course very different in different situations with different clients and their comfort level with being creative. People can be
Yeah.
very frozen around that. It sounds too risky, too weird. Oh, don't make me do that. But a lot of times it's in situations where there's too much internally being held
Mm,
and overwhelming. I can think of a recent case where I was working with someone who had some very severe symptoms around parts, OCD, stuff like that. And they couldn't process, couldn't actually even bring down their nervous system enough to kind of feel present. There was a lot of dissociation. Being able to start drawing different aspects of themselves and putting them out on a piece of paper allowed them to dialogue externally in a way that helped unblending. It helped them unblend. Oh, now I can see the part outside myself, and I can notice that there's more aspects to who I am. I'm seeing the part that is very obsessive compulsive, or the part that is feeling hopeless, or the part that is avidly seeking help, so you can start to see more of the whole self system that way, which gains that perspective taking internally that helps someone start to feel dual awareness again. They have one foot more in the present, and they can notice these aspects of themselves that formed out of traumatic experiences that are kind of locked into past scripts, and they can start to work with them and not be just caught in them. And I think of that in terms of parts work, but there's so many ways in which art it's calming, it's relaxing. In a lot of ways it can just be prescriptive in that way. It can be organizing and on timelines, doing creative timelines is one way. Just even to begin that reflective process inward. What's a feeling that you have inside? Oh, how would you draw that? Or what color would you use? Making it really simple. So when I'm working with someone initially, I like to keep it very simple, and you've got to work with their comfort
mhm.
level around using anything creative. If it's been a long time in their life and they haven't done it for a while, it feels risky. So making it easy, collage is, pre-cut out stuff, just simple. I sometimes just work on a whiteboard with color markers. You can always erase them. It's not precious or anything like that. And make it easy. Make that simple for them, and don't bring out all the paints and the special art materials right away, I'd say, unless they have comfort level with it.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you're saying. It's first of all, I loved how you basically just said even a concept like helping somebody get unblended, right? When people have very severe symptoms or strong symptoms, usually they're blended, like their adult self with whatever emotion or memory or part of them that has a lot of
Yeah,
experience or trapped. So I love how you're basically saying, even just saying, oh, let's just see what's here, right? So almost like even right, just taking a color or drawing or putting a name on a paper of a part or of right, like a certain symptom can help create that distance, which I think is really you're talking about dual awareness. It's like so it's helping the client see like you are a being and a person separate from this part of you, even though it's a part of you, which can be, I think, really powerful. And I love how you just said, even I love how you said simplicity instead of it being like, oh no, my therapist is telling me to do this. Just like, oh, like externalizing an internal experience of choose a color, and just like scribble.
yeah.
You're reminding me of one of our art therapists. I remember she was doing an art exercise with me. I'm like, oh, try one with me, and I'm just thinking out loud, like sometimes people think art is just for children, and it's not. It's actually for anyone who's just open. And I have found it as a way to almost like it's less pressuring for me to look at what's going on inside. And we did this exercise, and I ended up drawing something. It was a way of tapping into my unconscious without even realizing. I thought I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do something very light. I ended up drawing something that was very directly connected to something I was working on in my own therapy. And I was like, wow, like the unconscious, if it feels comfortable, and I obviously brought it to my own therapy session and not with, this
Yeah.
exercise we were doing. I'm like, okay, we're not going to present this because I looked at it and I'm like, wow, like the unconscious really has a way of
Yeah.
expressing what I was like. I looked at the drawing and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I want to just also name that, like, people think sometimes it's just for children, and it's really not. It's really just a method of expression for anyone, right?
Yeah, I think we're just we really don't have art education in the country that promotes lifelong creative pursuits, unfortunately. So a lot of times people lose touch with their creative expressive side post school, and it doesn't have to be that way, and revisiting and going back to it. And people have a lot of performance anxiety. Of course, a lot of people have a lot of perfection that comes up. But yeah, this idea that it taps into the unconscious is one of the great benefits of art therapy, in that you're not you're really going beneath the surface quite often. Not every directive or exercise or approach does that. But if you're expressing your feelings and coming out, you're often stepping back, surprised at what your unconscious mind brought to life. It works in a way like dreams do. Um, and that's why, it's just like Jungian and analysis uses a lot of art and other it's been used in psychoanalysis forever, so it does help connect with parts you can't see yet, right? So aspects of yourself that are still hidden in the background in various ways.
Okay. Wow. So, just in terms of wrapping up this conversation, I think what I'm hearing is two separate things, and then I want to hear a takeaway from you. I guess if somebody
Hmm.
is a client and has complex trauma, what I'm taking away is like your pain and your urgency is valid, because I know there's clients and therapists, or well, you might be a therapist who's also a client. But like
Yeah.
urgency makes sense. It's important to go slowly and be mindful and work with like parts and the system, and that is trauma work. It's not just the reprocessing, right? Phases 3 to 7, right, in the work of EMDR. And what I'm also hearing is that, well, also, right, like when people are stuck in a trauma, emotional, or memory, then it makes sense that their window of tolerance or their symptoms are pretty severe, right? Um, I wonder, and then for the therapist, what I'm hearing you say is humility, right? Like making sure that we're not reenacting a certain dynamic. I wonder, and you're talking about the importance of working creatively or working with the system, almost like having the capacity to be reflective in some kind of way, or noticing the parts at play. Do you want to share a little bit of like hope or the research or what you've seen in people who have been able to engage in the slow but consistent process of complex trauma? What have you seen for clients who have been able to engage in that work? I want to hear a little bit of like the hopeful part. Let's say somebody is having symptoms or working with, because I've seen clients with real symptom
Mhm.
shift. So I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit to give some input or hope or energy to those out there. Yeah.
It it's it it's magical when things start to shift, when a client starts to feel connection internally with different parts enough to feel self-led, to feel like also they're able to nurture internally with compassion aspects of themselves. And that that shift can happen dramatically, or sometimes very slowly over time, and quite often in layers. There's layers to the work. And yeah, absolutely, so gratifying for the therapist to be able to be a part of that process, to see that the symptoms that once gripped someone kind of by the throat and body, lift away and then be able to open up and go off of that survival mode and start feeling and their life again and reconnecting with their emotions and thriving. And it I use phases. I use phases in the way that I think about treatment, but art can be a wonderful part of that process that brings them back in touch with their emotions in a gentle way. It's often doesn't require this whole talk therapy face to face, confronting yourself in the same way. It's gentle, it's empowering. It also has a sense of the humanity of their self that it brings back. It's not clinicalizing everything and talking always about the brain and neuroscience and all of that, which is really important. I love it, by the way, but it also brings back the human
Yeah.
aspect of creativity and play, which I think play is an underutilized aspect of or underutilized concept in therapy, that we need to be playful and creative in order to kind of counteract all the constriction and uh, dark emotions that come with PTSD and complex PTSD. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I could talk about cases, but I think that would go far beyond what this
Yeah. Maybe
time
another
allows.
time. Maybe
Yeah.
another time. I love what you just said, and I'll tell you why. When I hear about a therapist who, first of all, thank you for sharing the hope, because I know from my own experience in my I always believed in psychotherapy, but when I experienced my own really good healing work, I'm like, wow, I really believe in this. And also
Yeah.
as seeing clients, like some clients have complex symptoms, and then seeing how some symptoms kind of like just softened or disappeared, and I was like, wait, we're going on to this symptom, but could we just notice that that actually shifted, or that we actually like that you actually just said something compassionately, or you actually took in my kind words to this part that usually never receives anything about how much I actually might care and show up for this part of you, right? Or speaking
Yeah.
up for this, self-deprecating voice. But I think seeing that shift is so important, and just noticing the power of healing, and just also to name that like healing can feel sloppy. Symptoms could be more uncomfortable, usually are. I know a lot of my friends right now are saying like they're engaging in therapy, their kids are having, we were just talking about parenting before, but in our private conversation. But sometimes when our children have certain struggles, sometimes our own internal stuff or our own childhood emotions or memories come up. And I have friends saying, like, I don't get it. I'm trying to be emotionally aware, but I'm so much more symptomatic, or I'm so uncomfortable. And I'm like, hello, darling. Welcome to the world of healing. It's uncomfortable, but
Right.
that's part, right? Because they're like, this is how it's supposed to feel. I'm like, yeah, becoming emotionally weak can be uncomfortable, but I would ask someone not to get dissuaded. Like it could be that with the right
Yeah.
guidance and support, that you get finding your way through instead of running away is usually the way to healing. Right?
It's yeah, when you're facing your stuff, you hit the bumps. I think. And that's where I think too, having some creative
Yeah,
approaches really help to make it manageable and um it makes it tolerable in
yeah,
some ways, more tolerable.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, creativity, like I'm a dreamer. I have collages. People know this. Like I'll collage about painful parts of my life or emotions. And I also collage a beautiful aspect. And I always say, like, if somebody says, oh, just make a hopeful collage. I'm like, no, first I have to lean into the pain or the sadness or the grief or whatever it is. Because they always say the same vessel where there's pain is where there's pleasure. I'm like, let me just validate or be with or acknowledge, and then as that's seen, okay, then I can go and collage on my beautiful dreams. So, but I hang up the hopeful ones, but I also know I have space and people who I share the emotions that I'm processing that maybe are the darker
That's
ones.
great. Yeah, it is. It's
Yeah.
it,
Well, I need it for
the
myself.
both sides. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Liz, do you want to tell us a little bit just before we wrap up about ways that people can work with you, how you support therapists or clients. Just tell us a little bit about, and then I'll link up any
Mhm.
links. Yeah, when I post this. Yeah.
Okay. I'm I I run intake and as am a supervisor at Trauma Institute, Child Trauma Institute, and we do consultation with clinicians everywhere. If you're interested in intensive therapy too, contact me. I can tell you all about it, what it is like, or maybe you have clients that might be interested. As far as art therapy and EMDR, we have a website, Jocelyn, Sherry, myself, and Jen, and I'll have to send you the link for that.
I
Don't
didn't know
have it
you
off
had
the
a
top of my
website.
head.
I didn't know you had a
Yeah,
website for that. Oh my goodness. Yes,
yeah,
send
we
it to
do. For
me.
the, yes.
Okay.
So I will send you I will send you the link for that, that people can check out some of the chapters and authors and what we're doing in terms of that. I have a training that I do 2 or 3 times a year through Trauma Institute, which is integrating EMDR and art therapy with complex clients. So that's available on the Trauma Institute website. And if anyone's interested in the book, it's on Amazon. Um, so that's pretty much reach out to me through my email. I can give you my email, and you can
Yeah.
yeah,
You'll tell me which one.
anybody who's curious or have questions. Yep.
Yeah. Are you
Yeah.
still offering what you offered, what I was lucky to be part of? Do you offer the consultation, so helping EMDRIA certified therapists who are working towards becoming consultant level? Is that something you also are
Yep.
offering? Okay.
Usually run a CIT group of 4 once a year. So sometime this spring, I'll be gathering together another group. So if somebody's interested in becoming a consultant, they absolutely can contact us. Trauma Institute has a deal where we have a kind of I guess what you would call a scholarship now, where you can help with our trainings and our consultation groups in exchange for the
Mm,
fee. So it's a great deal. Of course, it may be a little bit more intense work too, but
yeah.
if you're worried about the cost and you really want to become a consultant, it's a great avenue to go through.
Yeah.
So you can contact me if you're interested.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say one thing before we hop off for anyone listening. The reason I was so excited about Liz is that in my consultancy training with Liz, and even, right, like you trained a few of our staff on EMDR and art,
Mhm.
the way that you talk about EMDR, it just felt so relatable. So for anyone listening, like find EMDR consultants who help you own information or working with trauma in a way that feels relatable and that feels doable for yourself and for your clients. Because like Liz, in our conversations, I just felt like, wow, okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is clear. I have to be creative. Let's just notice when there's pre-verbal trauma, dissociations. I just have to say for anyone listening, like, and Liz, that's why, like, I said to you, I'm like, you're one of my, I just respect you so much
Oh, thank
because,
you.
yeah, because raising awareness about ways that we treat trauma, like I write blogs, and the reason I do a lot of times is because I was that person 2 a.m. like Googling, and a lot of the content online is not trauma informed. Is like 3 to 5 sessions EMDR will heal you, and I'm like, well, why haven't I healed yet? And it's
Right,
like it takes some time and it takes nuance and working with complex symptoms or knowing how to work with it. It's not just like this target and the target might be off, right? So just find your really
right.
good mentors, and Liz is one of them. So if she has time on her schedule, you're a
Thank
lucky
you.
person. No, really, I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so
Oh,
grateful for
thank
your
you.
time.
Grateful too.
Yeah, and maybe another time we'll talk about, maybe if you have the time, I would love to talk about maybe a case that we could learn from in terms
Okay.
of like, for therapists and clients and for anyone who's wanting to learn. So,
Yeah, I'd love to. That would be really, really fun. Yeah.
yeah,
Bring it to life a little more in a case. It's
yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah. So I am
Well,
so,
thank you so much. This
yeah,
has
thank
been
you
such
so much.
fun.
Okay.
Great to reconnect.
Yeah, same.